view to speaker mode. So then you'll have the screen and you'll be able to see who's speaking. So we'll get started. Welcome everyone to Preservation Connecticut's Talking About Preservation, Moderns in Connecticut. I'm Jane Montanaro, Executive Director of Preservation Connecticut, and welcome you all to our series of noontime forums that we've been doing a nice session of this fall. So for those of you who don't know us, Preservation Connecticut is the statewide nonprofit historic preservation organization. We were established in 1975 by a special act of the Connecticut General Assembly as the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation. And just this year in January, we started doing business as Preservation Connecticut. As I mentioned, I'm the executive director. We have a staff of 8 at our boarding house in Hamden. Chris Wiegren is our deputy director and resident architectural historian and editor of our Preservation News magazine. We have 3 circuit riders, Brad Scheid, Stacy Vero, and Mike Farino. They are our technical service field representatives who, as soon as we get a call through phone or email or contact, they are dispatched out into your community to help resolve any of your preservation issues. Renee Trubert is our Making Places and Preservation Services Manager. She manages our Mills website and inquiries from developers and municipalities around the state about redeveloping historic mill buildings. And she also runs our fee-for-service programs in which we help developers with national or state registered nominations and with historic tax credit applications. Jordan Sorensen is our development director and special projects manager, and Kristen Hopewood is our development associate. So we've been doing this series of workshops to continue our mission to preserve, protect, and promote the building sites and landscapes that contribute to the heritage and vitality of Connecticut communities. This has been just a really great series where we get to bring wonderful guest speakers on and engage with a lot of new members and community leaders and residents, and they get to learn about wonderful preservation projects that are happening in Connecticut and the work of our partners and some of the work that Preservation Connecticut is doing. So we'd love for you to put any questions in the chat or be comfortable in asking questions at the end of the program. That's what we're here for. We want to share information with you and we want to hear from you. So we're super excited to have our guest today to talk about mid-century modern architecture. Jenny Schofield from the State Historic Preservation Office, Bob Gregson, Creative Director of CCT, retired, and Bruce Becker, a developer from Becker and Becker. So I'll let Jenny start the program and then we'll pass it off to Bob and Bruce.
Thank you. I'm Jen Schofield. I'm an architectural historian at the State Historic Preservation Office. And before that, I was a consultant doing cultural resources work. And so I studied a lot of moderns before coming to SHPO. Preservation Connecticut asked for a talk on moderns, and I'm going to attempt to give you a statewide overview in about 10 minutes. So they're just highlights. It's just a snapshot. I'm definitely not going to be able to name every name and show every building in the state, but I hope that it can give you an introduction to some of the themes and what was happening and some of what's going on now. And Bob Gregson is joining us after I give an overview, we're going to talk specifically about the former Armstrong Rubber Company building in New Haven on Long Wharf, which is also known as the Pearly Building. And Bob Gregson's going to talk about some of the history and some of the advocacy work to retain the building in the 1990s. And Bruce Becker is going to give you a sneak peek about what he's up to reusing the Trelli building. So that's really exciting. Jane, you can go to that first slide. Okay. So generally, when we talk about the modern period, it's nationally about the time frame starting in the 1920s, going up to about 1979. And in Connecticut, we start our time frame more like 1930. I want everyone to know that while there are examples of modern design all across the country in lots of different forms, Connecticut's really important and really pivotal in bringing modernism to the United States. We have an incredible concentration of modern architecture here, and not just architecture, but also very pivotal pioneering thinkers across all design fields, networking and getting together and doing work all across Connecticut and in the region. So we are among states like California, Florida, Illinois, and Massachusetts that have this kind of design concentration, and that's really important. So with that said, kind of thinking about the time period about 1930 to 1979, this is a design movement. So there's no hard stop. Like any design, modernism continues through apprentices and people who have worked with the original sort of forefathers. And as modernism gets older and people want change, the change is kind of gradual. And I just want to mention a couple major events. There are two currents of modern design. You've all probably heard about the Bauhaus starting in Germany, where Walter Gropius is the first head of the school. And one of his goals is to integrate all of the design arts. He views them as inseparable in design. And Marcel Breuer gets his start at Bauhaus. But while that's happening, we have some of our first really American architectural styles being developed. And we have Frank Lloyd Wright, who doesn't view himself as a modernist, but he publishes a portfolio of his early works in Germany in 1910. And the modernists in Germany see that and actually take some notes from Frank Lloyd Wright. So we have sort of an American track, and then all the European and Russian and Ukrainian immigrants who come during the course of the war. And then of course, things start happening in the 1930s. There are some really notable exhibits, and Chick Austin at the Wadsworth Museum in Hartford brings some of those early exhibits to Connecticut. At the same time, we have William Lescaze, who designs the first known international style country house in New Hartford, of all places, in 1932. So when the Bauhaus closes during World War II, Walter Gropius and Marcel Breuer come over to the Harvard Graduate School of Design. They train a bunch of people in modernism in Bauhaus. And then Marcel Breuer and 4 of his students all come to New Canaan after World War II and start building their own houses. And one of the themes in modernism is that they are using their own houses as a place of experimentation. So I can't give you the whole national history in 2 minutes, but these are some of the highlights. And again, the point is that we have an incredible network here, right in Connecticut. If you want to just go to the next slide.
Yep. And Jenny, can you try to stay close to your microphone?
Okay.
You go in and out a little bit.
Uh-oh.
But when you're up close to the screen, we can hear you pretty well.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay, so here's just a couple images of Frank Lloyd Wright's work that was published in Europe. It was published in German and in English. And this first international style country house that we have in New Canaan. And you could go to the next. Okay. So there are a lot of themes to think about in modern design. There's an incredible push for being innovative with structure and materials, not having any extra, emphasizing form rather than surface ornament, integrating the landscape into the design, integrating furniture, lighting, landscape along with the house. But one of the things I want to highlight is while we have these incredible internationally known designers, there's also a current of really prolific, more locally or regionally known architects who are doing good work as well. So one sample of that is Willis Mills. So he serves in World War II. He gets his degree in 1929. He works in New York and then works for William Mills, who you just saw was one of our first international style designers here. He built his own house in New Canaan in 1939. So he's actually in New Canaan before the Harvard Five get there. And he lives in New Canaan all the way up until his death in 1979. He establishes an architectural practice, and this picture on the left is the Fish Church in Stamford, which is designed by Wallace K. Harrison, who was a well-known architect at the time with very strong connections. And Mills bids on that project, but he's not selected because he just doesn't have enough experience with church design at the time. But he's chosen to be part of the team. So he's gaining experience with Wallace Harrison and the engineers and the lighting designers engaged in that project. But he's allowed to design the parish unit alongside Harrison. So a few years later, and Fish Church, by the way, is on its way to becoming our next National Historic Landmark. A couple years later, he gets the commission to build St. Mark's Church. And in between, he goes to Europe and he studies modernist churches. So the St. Mark's Church is kind of transitional. The congregation wasn't quite ready to fully embrace modernist design. They were nervous about it. So they have some traditional elements in the plan, but it overall has a modern aesthetic. And then Mills is still here. He designs another house for himself in New Canaan, which you see at the top. And then he also designs the Duracell house, which is where James Russo, the furniture designer, lived. He's the first owner of the Duracell house. And the Duracell house is built to showcase the new Duracell material, which was a fibrous concrete. So that's just one example of how people are interconnected. Can you go to the next? Okay. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to cram a lot into this 10 minutes here. So here come the Harvard Five. Marcel Breuer built his own house in New Canaan in 1947. And it happens to be a prototype that he uses many times. He experiments with the network of modernists who were vacationing or seasoning in the summer on Cape Cod. And he is well connected all over the place. He also becomes friends with Rufus Stillman, who's an executive in the Torrington Torrin Manufacturing Company in Torrington. And he builds or designs about 20 houses for Stillman and his friends, with very along the same lines. And you can see the T at the bottom there is actually a symbol for Torrington High School, which is actually a piece of the exterior wall and window forms in the Torrington Manufacturing Headquarters, which still stands in Torrington. Okay, go to the next. So just an example of how people are moving around. Here's some work by Breuer out in Cape Cod. So there's this whole other network of people just a short distance away in the summertime at Cape Cod. This is Breuer's prototype, and this one he builds for a Hungarian-born painter, designer, light sculptor, whose name is Kepis. And he's also teaching at MIT, where you find Serge Chimaev, who's another one of Breuer's friends. Okay, go to the next. Okay. And just an idea of what else is happening at the time frame. We have a local architect named Victor Sivkin, who's doing stuff like you see in the top left, which you might think of as a significant building right now, but he's hanging out with Olav Hammerstrom and Serge Chimaev out on Cape Cod, and he builds this modernist studio out there in 1960 as well. And you can go to the next slide. I mentioned Frank Lloyd Wright as sort of, although he did not like being described as a modernist, is sort of at the beginning of the modernist movement in the United States. And we have some architecture in Connecticut that reflects his influence as well. The Norwalk Preservation Trust has been doing house tours every year, 2018, 2019. And there's one of the Wrightian houses in Norwalk was included on one of those. So we have Tirana, which is designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, but you also have examples of work from his apprentices. And on the right-hand side, there's a triangular themed house designed by Alan Gelvin, who was born in New York, goes to architecture school, and then actually quits architecture school because it's too boring for him and he wants to go work for Wright. So he goes out to Taliesin East. He apprentices Wright, and then he actually serves as a general contractor for Tirana, which is built in New Canaan in 1955, before starting his own architectural practice in New Canaan in 1957. And then he's building his own version of Wrightian design out there. And I just wanted to mention the house in Norwalk is in Village Creek, which is one of the earliest Connecticut planned housing developments for moderns. They had a homeowners association with bylaws that encouraged contemporary design. And they also really early had a non-discrimination policy to encourage Black residents to live there. And Percy Eiffel, who works for, I think what we know right now is the largest African-American architectural firm at the time, he buys a lot in this development and built his own house. Go to the next, please. I just want to cover some of the architectural types that we see. So we also have semi-prefabricated and prefabricated design as a big current post-World War. The tech-built houses were designed by Carl Koch, who overlapped with Gropius and Breuer at Harvard Graduate School of Design in 1937. And he is really interested in trying to solve the post-war housing shortage. So he develops a system after going to Sweden and learning about their design. He develops a system with a load-bearing post beam frame and then a modular plywood and composite panel that comes in 4 to 8 foot width. So it could be built in about 3 days, very affordable, and can actually be disassembled and moved. Next. Okay. One other thing that's happening around this time period, especially post-war, is that we have an interest in suburban office parks. And the one I'm showing here is Victor Bisharat designed office park in Stamford, developed between 1966 and 1978. And unfortunately, there's been a preservation issue around one of the buildings in this complex, and I believe it was recently lost. Next. Okay. So going over to Hartford and looking at some commercial buildings, on the left-hand side, we have one of Hartford's, or the first one that I'm aware of, Hartford's first version of commercial modern. This is by a local designer. It includes some sort of elements of Art Deco and modern and international style inside and out. And also was sort of a flagship development post-war to create commercial space downtown. And it also serves as an advertisement for the Aluminum Company of America and for the Conair storefronts, which you see in catalogs at the time. You'll see the shape of it looks an awful lot like Robert Venturi's decorated shed, which is kind of interesting because just a few years later, 18 years later, he's moving into postmodern and taking a different slant on the same form. Next. So that was early 1950s and 1968, but in between, also in Hartford, here comes our first two-sided building, which is by Max Abramowitz of Harrison and Abramowitz. And this is sort of the flagship of the Constitution Plaza Urban Renewal Project. So if you think about the progression, and you have a local architect, a new postmodernist who was trained as a modernist to begin with, and then this sort of urban renewal, nationally known architect elsewhere working within the same couple decades. Next. Okay. So just going to really quickly touch on just a few of the things that are happening or places you can go to learn more. The New Haven Preservation Trust did a very good survey and architectural context from 1931 going all the way up to 1980, which is very easily accessible online, so you can go and see what else is in New Haven. Next. Okay. And I just wanted to mention a few other research sources. There are a lot. If you Google archives of any architect, you will find where to go, and a lot of plans and things like that are online. But in addition to New Haven, New Canaan has a modern houses survey, which you can download. The Cape Cod Modern House Trust is very active and provides a lot of information. There's a lot to see at Docomomo's website. And then we do have a context for mid-century modern houses in Connecticut, which is not online, but I will put it up there soon. And there are similar contexts that other states have done, and some of those include commercial as well. Next. Okay. Okay. And there is some stuff you can see online. The New Haven Preservation Trust has one of Docomomo's annual tours accessible online. And I hear from Bob and Bruce, I guess the New Haven Preservation Trust is doing an annual auction, and you can win a stay at Bruce's new hotel at Pirelli and a tour from Bob Gregson. So I would look into that. Okay, next. And I will just quickly mention that Docomomo, which is an organization that follows modern architecture, every turn of the decade is identifying trends to look for with the next group of buildings that turns 50 years old. So they do have an initiative now looking at the 1970s. And a couple of the themes they're picking up on is that the urban renewal program ends in 1954. And then in terms of design, there's a movement away from the corporate office parks. There's no dominant aesthetic. There's, modernism is starting to get a little bit stale, and people are interested in experimenting again and seeing what else they can create. At the same time, there's a lot of advocacy movements happening in the country, and there's a reaction to all the changes that came with urban renewal. So there's an oil crisis, which brings interest in energy efficiency. There's conservation, preservation, environmental law movements. And it's also post-civil rights. We're getting our first affirmative action programs, and we're starting to see, or at least be able to document, more of the minority architects. And the National Organization of Minority Architects was formed in 1972. So while some people may have been working in firms before that, they're not incredibly visible. So Docomomo is really interested in that. And then as you get to the 1980s, you also see a lot more women-owned architectural firms. And with that, I'm going to end on Bob's Pirelli slide. I'll let Bob take it from here.
Thanks, Jenny. Bob, you have to unmute.
Oops.
There you are.
Okay.
We hear you.
All right.
Good.
Good.
Take it away.
Well, first of all, I just thank you, Jenny. I thought that was a very hard job to push into so much history, and there are so many different ways to see modernism. Of course, modernism is not a style as much as modernism is an idea. And so modernism changes, and it's very hard to talk about it. The other thing that fascinates me is that pre-World War II, you have those Christmas in Connecticut movies, and even in the 50s, Lucy and Desi bought a house in Westport, Connecticut, and everybody's got a colonial. I mean, the colonial was, the image of Connecticut. It was a very rural place. However, I have to say that Ricky would go to New York to work at the club, and even in Christmas in Connecticut, they all worked in New York. So what was interesting about these people who had these little colonial houses is that they were very sophisticated and knew about various styles. I mean, maybe those people didn't, but the idea of people living in New York and coming to Connecticut. And it's amazing. It's a tale of two cities. We've got so many, a whole different world after World War II, and the highway comes through, and Connecticut changes quite dramatically with the cities and even the office park that we talked about, which was a brand new idea back in those days. So if you think of the Armstrong Rubber Company, which was built, I think it was probably designed in the late 50s. you're thinking of saving this marvelous building, you have to put yourself back in the 1990s when people were, no one really saw this building anymore. They took it for granted. And so that this was the first building, modern building that was saved in Connecticut. I think part of it is to try also to appreciate the building, which is what I think you have to do when you're preserving it, is to understand why it was here. And there's a marvelous little tape of a party they had years later talking about the building. And that's the James Walsh and General Joe Stewart who were managing this. They talked about the idea that they could have moved anywhere, but they moved to New Haven primarily because of Mayor Lee, who was interested in modern architecture, and got them a good deal on the property, which was on Long Wharf, which was a slaughterhouse. So Mayor Lee, what is it? He condemned that, and then it was able to be sold. And Mayor Lee really wanted a building that was an entranceway building, a building that would announce the city, the same way that the Max Abramovich building, the two-sided building in Hartford, announces Hartford. Well, now of course it's the Science Center announces Hartford, but this building was the design of it was very interesting. I mean, the program was to house the various strata, the CEO, and then they had a financial place, a floor, and a floor for research and development. But the key to this building was the back side of the building, which unfortunately does not exist anymore. And that was a research and development area, which they desperately needed. And they would run tires back there to see how they would work. And it was a very interesting building. And it was separated by a firewall with the front part of the building. Now, the other thing that was interesting about the building, of course, everybody sees the open space of the building. And that, I think, is a kind of a brilliant thing, because Mayor Lee wanted a tall building to announce the city, but Armstrong Rubber didn't need a tall building. So by jacking the building up, it gave it some presence. It also framed the city in the background. And but it also was a engineering feat. I mean, it is built like a bridge, and Bruce will talk about that, how the sides of the building were built, and then all of the trusses went across, and the building is hung from the trusses, hung from above. So let's talk about a little bit about saving a building like this. How do you do that, or how do you save anything? Well, we were fortunate to have a whole group of interested architects in New Haven. And when the mall was proposed and this building was going to be destroyed, we said, wait a second, this is a great building. And a lot of people wondered why it was a great building. And so it took a matter of educating people. And one of the reasons I shot all the photos you're looking at, I went out in the morning and took as many different pictures as I could of the building to try to show people what that building was about. It was about sun and shadow. It was about the sculptural quality of the building. It's very interesting when you've got you try to save a building or something. It's not just because we want to save a building. It is part of who we are, and we only realize and understand ourselves when we can look back at the types of buildings and the way those buildings were put together. It's almost like they're part of our like a family album. And when those are gone, if the family album gets lost, it's very sad because part of ourselves is lost. So this is part of our family album. But we put together a coalition of local architects, and we decided, well, we're going to try to get it on the state register. At least it won't protect it from being torn down, but it will give it some gravity to stay up. So we met with our marvelous historian, the late Elizabeth Mills Brown, who was our champion, and she kind of told all of us how to do this. And we got a whole group together. There was Rob Narachi, who works for Pelley, and Richard Mundy, who works for Herb Newman, and about 15 different people on this committee. And we went out and all did different parts. One of the part was to get letters of support, which we got from Kevin Roach and Rufus Stillman and Nick Weber from the Albers Foundation, and many more, Vince Scully, to try to give it some understanding, or show people that look again at this building. It's very important to keep up. So when you're doing this, you do get emotionally involved with this building. And we got to meet the little gentleman there on the lower left corner is Bob Gatchie. If you look on the little sign, it says co-architects Marcel Breuer and Robert Gatchie. And Bob, we got to meet him in New York and became great friends. And we would take him around to different buildings and give him a tour of New Haven. And he was very proud of this building, and told us, little fun stories. And in that back area, which was now gone, he designed that, of course, with Breuer. So he was very proud of his contributions to the building. So it is really. It's really wonderful that now, after all these years, there is some hope to it. And as you were saying, Jenny, the whole idea of modernism shifts, and the reason for this building is different than it was, back in the 1960s. But now I think Bruce is coming up, and he'll talk about it with the whole. He's taking an old building and making it conceptually a new building, and without destroying the old building. And he'll talk, and I think he's doing a great job. But I'm not what else to tell you about the building. I don't know if I should mention the sign, which is a wonderful story. Do you mind if I tell it, Bruce? I guess not. The sign, the sign that says what?
By all means, please. It's one of the most interesting aspects of the project.
Yeah. They were designing the building, and Bob Gatchie told us this story, so it's very funny. That Armstrong wanted to put a sign on the top of the building, and Marcel Breuer got bristled at that idea. He said, no, that'll hurt the building. I'll design you a sign. So he designed a sign, and unfortunately, there is you cannot put up a freestanding sign on Long Wharf. There is you're not allowed to do that. So, but as they went on and on, they found out that you could put a sign on a building. So if you look underneath that little, that sign, there's a little gardener's shed there with a door and a window, and then they put the sign above it. So that was okay. That was all right to have that sign there, because they went around the they fulfilled what they had to do there, but. So anyway, I think, I'm not going to take too much more time, but I'll let Bruce talk, and if there's any questions, I'm sure happy to answer them. I mean, even about Connecticut. And by the way, Jenny, I'm sorry, I found that I had taken some digital photos of Sun Terrace, and it was interesting to see the old photo of it, because the house still looks the same, although they've got brightly colored mullions on the windows and everything. But anyway, be that as it may, I'm going to let Bruce talk now. Thanks.
Great. Well, Bob, that was a great overview of the history of the building, and it puts a lot on my shoulders to finish saving the first modern building in Connecticut to be saved, because it's not something that happens quickly, and I don't think you can truly save a building until you have found a new use for it. And I also was really impressed with Jen's overview of modernism. I have to say that I am a product of that. I grew up on Chichester Road in New Canaan in a house that Hugh Smolin designed. My mom was a furniture designer, modern furniture designer. My dad was an industrial designer, and his office was in the Seagram's building. He had one of the first leases there, and later he founded my company Becker and Becker, and I've been running it since 1988. But he started in 1950, and then he moved to the office to New Canaan and shared office space with Willis Mills. So Jen talks about all of the interconnections. There are a lot of them, and I'm finding out about more and more of them. But this building, I wasn't looking to develop a hotel. I'm an architect, preservationist, and developer, and I really see myself as an architect first. And I only got involved with development because sometimes you need to be a developer to completely save a building. And that's been a lot of what I've been up to recently. But let me see if I can share the screen. Let me know if you guys can see this. Can you see the full screen here?
Yep, I can.
Okay. Yeah, so this picture was actually taken from like the kitchen showroom in IKEA on the second floor looking out. But I knew the building. I was a student at the Yale School of Architecture in the mid-'80s, and was fascinated with it. I just loved the light and shadow and the gymnastics of the structure, with the building being sort of held by trusses and cantilevered, and the expression of the trusses on the north and south facade. And I'm so grateful that it wasn't taken down, because it is part of our family history, our legacy. And it's sort of crazy that modern buildings there are fewer of them every year. I mean, modernism is an idea about the future, and yet now here we are looking as much back at them as forward, which strikes me as a little bit odd. But I sort of felt when this building went for 20 years without being reused, I felt I had to get involved. I wasn't looking to do this, and I have to say it's probably the riskiest and most anxiety-producing project that I've done. Imagine developing a hotel in the middle of a pandemic, where the hotels are sort of the most impacted building. But I'm an optimist, and I think we'll get through the pandemic, and this building is going to have a really bright future. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we're planning for it. Let's see here. I've got to go back to the beginning here. Bear with me. I think somehow I ended up at the end of my presentation. So I'm going to go in the reverse direction very quickly. Okay. Here we go. This is the beginning. And I know I've maybe got 10 minutes, so I'll do this. This is a longer presentation, so I'm going to rush a little bit through these slides. You can see in the corner the sign building, which is it's a fascinating building. It's sort of like a miniature version of the Armstrong building because it has an opening in two directions and you see through it. Very beautiful sculptural building. And just a little background about myself. Our most recent big project was the redevelopment of 777 Main Street in Hartford, which is a Welton Beckett building built in around 67, a couple years before the Armstrong Rubber Company building opened. Before that, we're best known in New Haven for having come up with a solution to the old Schartenberg site in New Haven with 360 State Street, and got to know the way to navigate the building process in New Haven with that. And that was an exciting sort of step forward with our sustainability ventures, because that's a LEED Platinum building, which the project in Hartford also is. And then before that, we redeveloped the Octagon on Roosevelt Island, which was a A.J. Davis building that had crumbled to the ground, and we had to sort of piece it together again. But our philosophy is sort of to look at underused buildings and sites and put them back into productive reuse and make them as sustainable as we can along the way. This is just a list of all the people involved. I can't really take credit for this project. Bob and Peter probably get the most credit because they kept the building standing. And I'm, together with about 100 other people, are trying to put it back together. We've got a great team of consultants, preservation consultants, engineers, attorneys. It's a team effort. So this is just a list of everyone who's helping us with it. But one of the things unique, and maybe it makes it even more challenging, is that we're not only trying to find a way to reuse this historic building, but also make it one of the most sustainable hotels in the world. We're not going to use any fossil fuels for heating or powering it. We're going to design it so that it's uses 60% less energy than a typical hotel. We're going to provide all of the energy for heating and power from solar on site. We believe we'll be the first passive house certified hotel in the United States. There are a couple of them in Europe, but none yet in the United States. Those of you who might not be familiar with passive house is that you just spend a lot of effort and energy on the building envelope so that the building actually passively heats and cools itself without a need for too much external heat. We're also innovating with the lighting. We're going to use all low voltage DC lighting, which is really efficient with power over Ethernet technology. And we think we'll end up using about 20% of the energy of a typical hotel. And we'll also try to be LEED Platinum too. So we're well along with that process. I'll just skip through here. You all know the site. It's interesting that since the building was abandoned, the boathouse, Canal Dock Boathouse was built, which is sort of a miniature convention center, and but it needs a hotel. So the fact that that is there and can be additional meeting space and create a connection to the waterfront, I think will make this more successful as a hotel. It also has incredible visibility. 140,000 cars a day pass it, which is one of the reasons why it was so sad that it was abandoned, because it was sort of a symbol for neglect for 20 years. And now hopefully it'll be a symbol for Connecticut's resurgence and sustainability. So it does have a big symbolic value, which is one of the reasons I was drawn to it. One of the things we're doing, you'll see there on the site plan, we're going to have 3 large solar canopies for covered parking. We spent about 2 years negotiating with IKEA, which owned the property. And by some miracle, we persuaded them to sell us the building and then these 2 lots, the lot that the building sits on, as well as the lot to the north. So we'll have about 130 parking spaces. We spent a lot of time. I took a certificate program at the hotel school at Cornell to understand this, and I got introduced to a bunch of consultants and experts, but we definitely needed parking. We needed really a lot of things in order to make this work out. And it's to IKEA's credit that they gave up their very best parking, which is really important to them. One of the reasons I think the building sat vacant and was used as a billboard is that this really is their front door. So they have been approached a lot of times with, but they somehow got confident that we had an alignment of interest, and they are also really interested in sustainability too. So I think we captured their imagination with this plan. Going back to connections, I just wanted to show this picture. This is my father and Marcel Breuer. And when I was researching the project, there are two really good archives. Syracuse University has a great Breuer archive, and then also the Smithsonian does. But I was going through the chronology of correspondence files during the late 60s, and I saw there was a file for Becker and Becker Associates. I thought, what could this possibly be? I was only 9 years old at the time, and I pulled it up, and it turned out my dad was on the board of Pratt Institute at the time, and he had invited Marcel Breuer to accept an honorary degree exactly 50 years ago, to the year. And so I realized my dad hasn't been alive for 10 years, but I thought, wow, this is another reason why I've got to dive into this. Because I know my dad always had Breuer furniture in his offices, and but I didn't even know there was this personal connection. So yet another reason why I had to dive into it. I'll just give you a preview of some of the things we're going to do on the inside. The building was totally gutted on the lower floors, the first and second floor. If you had been in there, I think there had been some art exhibits, and there was asbestos throughout the building, so they gutted it, and it's basically a blank slate. So we spent a lot of time with experts coming up with a plan for the first floor, which will have a couple meeting rooms you see in the upper right-hand corner of this drawing. There'll be an open lounge seating area on the right. We're actually spreading everything out more than normal because of we have this super filtration system for so when we do open it, we'll be able to make sure people are healthy in the building. And on the left, you'll see the bar. So hopefully maybe we can meet up at the bar, and we're dreaming up names for Bauhaus themed cocktails, and any suggestions are welcome. And then the gray area in the back is the back of house. But as we go up, this is just a view from the waterfront. I didn't realize I was going to give you this quick video, but this is my drone photographer's ode to the Armstrong Railroad building. It's almost over. So. The light and shadow are just remarkable on the facade, and there's no other building that has this two-story gap that you see through to the city. And that was actually inspired us as we were thinking about how to reprogram it, because it's 85 feet deep and 185 feet long. It's not perfect. It's deeper than you normally have for a hotel. So we had to come up with a creative way to use the core space, which I'll show you in a plan. The other thing is there's this 16-foot high mechanical space. Bob was talking about how important it was to the Mayor Lee, to have this gateway building. And originally there actually was another story. There was a 5th office floor on the upper portion. But this was space that the client didn't actually need. So Bob Gache has written a great book about this, but the Breuer office was upset, but Marcel Breuer agreed to take a floor off. And after all, the client didn't need it. It was sort of hard to justify building it. But he did have this extra tall space on the top, but there was only a couple pieces of mechanical equipment up there. It was really a ruse to make the building taller. And so one of our challenges was coming up with a plan for that level. Again, here's that first floor. This is a typical floor. We have, the building has a 5-foot module. I'm just gonna check my time because I'm probably almost out of time here. So, and so we'll have 15-foot wide, sort of very gracious hotel rooms, both looking out to the water and back to the city. You know, you've got great views of East Rock and West Rock, as well as Long Island Sound. And then we also, in the center zone, we have a couple light wells, so there'll be bunk rooms in the middle zone. But we're keeping the circulation as it was. We went through a 2-year process to get our plans approved with SHPO and the Park Service. We've probably spent a year and a half alone on the windows, which will, I think, be the first triple glaze passive house certified windows ever approved for a Tax Act project. But they're pretty amazing windows. And this is just a preview of what some of the smaller guest rooms will look like. Very minimalist sort of Bauhaus aesthetic. These are the historic executive offices Bob was talking about on the top floor. Those actually will be kept intact and rebuilt and turned into suites. And this is just a diagram showing our light well intervention. And on the top floor, where we have these 16-foot high ceilings, we're going to take what was a mechanical well where there was a big cooling tower, and we're going to glaze it, and that'll bring natural light into this floor, which will have gallery space and meeting space. This is just a study that we've spent about 6 months on to figure out how to get the building to meet passive house standards with all kinds of air sealing and special insulation that is environmentally friendly. And this picture I took yesterday, and you can see we've got the studs up, we've got the windows in on the second floor, and we're going to have a model room to look at by the end of next month that will be the basis for the full build out. There'll be 165 rooms, and a year from now, hopefully I can give you an in-person tour. This is on the north lot where we had to bring in pile drivers for the foundations for the solar canopies, because this was all fill from the harbor. And in fact, the original building is just built on a forest of piles. And then here's a rendering showing our lookout to Long Island Sound and overlooking the solar canopies. So I think that's, maybe I've used up my time. Happy to take questions or yield the floor. I'll stop sharing this.
Great. Thanks so much, Bruce. That's fascinating. Can't wait to see everything in person.
Yeah, no, it's an exhausting project and one that, but I think I'm so glad Bob and his team saved it, because it really is important. It would have been a shame to lose it, and I think it can really be a gem again.
So, Bruce, it's Brad Scheidt. How are you?
Hi, Brad.
I think, first of all, I'm sorry, I'm on the financing end. So financing a hotel is always hard. You are doing it in a pandemic. But it sounds like you've got a whole plan laid out, right?
I do. I think this is truly the hardest thing I've ever done. And we've done some challenging projects like the Warrigan, which was half fallen.
Yeah, for those who don't know, the Warrigan, the whole back of the building was gone. And it was going to be demolished. Bruce stepped up and took it on, and it's all there. So sorry, Bruce.
Yeah, no, so this is challenging. This may be the only hotel development that got financing this year. The sad story of the hotel on Elm Street in New Haven, where they tore down that beautiful building. I shouldn't have been torn down, but that obviously is not going forward. And we had no track record in doing hotels, so this was a big lift. We had to learn a lot, but we were very fortunate to get introduced to Liberty Bank, and they get a lot of credit for wanting to do something visible. They're trying to grow their commercial loan business. So it's very simple. We had looked at all these different SBA insured loans, which turns out we couldn't qualify for. So we have a bank loan, and we have, thanks to SHPO, we have federal and state tax credits. And we took a very conservative approach. There's a lot more equity than I ever thought I'd put in a project, but there was no other way to do it. And my wife wonders, whether we're going to be moving out of state or running away, because this is a very risky thing. But the numbers pan out. We've got a good debt service coverage ratio. we're not planning to open the hotel until the fall. And hopefully we'll have a new administration that will take control of this pandemic, and things will go back to normal before a year from now. I think and if that doesn't happen, there'll be a lot more to worry about, I guess. You know, as far as just, I mean, we have a relatively small grant for energy efficiency from UI. It's probably less than 1%, but it's basically tax credits and a loan and equity.
Tim, you had your hand raised. Do you have a question? Unmute yourself, please.
Okay, there we go. So I'm Tim Smith. I went to school in New Haven and was very surprised to hear that that building has been empty for 20 years. From what I remember, there was a big, you know, something like that when I was in school, and that was the early 80s. So I think you've done a really good job, and I'd certainly like to see how it comes out. You know, just fine.
Well, thank you. I didn't hear every word because of the connection, but it sounded like, I mean, it is surprising it was vacant for so long.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's a concrete building made with this mosaic, very high strength precast facade. And I actually think if there was a nuclear war, this is the last built structure that would be remaining in New Haven, because it was actually built so you could add more stories to it.
Oh.
There's, you know, I could imagine Breuer trying to sell Armstrong on this idea of building a building and leaving a 2-story gap in the middle. But I guess he sold them on it by saying, listen, you know, when you can expand, you can insert your floors here. So there it is. The structure is oversized, and this mosaic panel system, which also was used at the Hartford National Bank, the 777 Main Street. It's a super high strength precast facade made under these proprietary conditions and formulas. It's like a 6,000 PSI concrete that, you know, it's stronger than granite. So, you know, I think it would have lasted longer, but the greater danger was that, you know, that property would, with the next boom of the economy, it would be too valuable for parking or for another retail building. So, yeah, so I think it's far too early to declare victory yet. We're still in the midst of it, but I hope we can get together a year from now and celebrate an accomplishment.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And I also want to thank James and Preservation Connecticut has played a key role in helping us through the process as an advocate, as has the New Haven Preservation Trust, but particularly with the structuring of the state historic tax credits, which still has this crazy feature that when you sell them, they're taxable income, but if you ally yourself with a supportive nonprofit, you can actually get the full value from that. So thank you, Jane, and your whole organization for helping us with that.
Our tax credit voucher program. We're really excited to have a role in this project. It's just really exciting and going to be such a celebratory moment when we can go down there in person and see all the good work you've done.
I can't wait to show it off. But right now we're up, you know, staying up, working after dinner every night just to make sure it all comes together.
Yep. A lot of hard work between now and then.
Teamwork. Great. Well, are we, any more questions, or if anyone has any follow-up questions, feel free to call me or email me, but I consider this to be a community effort. So anything I can do to help share information about it, I'm happy to do.
Thank you, Bruce. We, I think you're a great example of how to deal with these, with this problem of revitalizing a building and keeping its spirit and still moving it into a new century. So thank you.
Yeah, I think for these, like the Warrigan, which was at the corner of Main and Broadway and Norwich, and 777, which was right behind the old State House, and this building, when they're vacant and the lights are off, it's not a good thing. So I'm just trying to turn the lights back on. That's my main goal. But it's not an easy thing to do.
Well, thank you so much, Bruce and Bob and Jenny. It was really a pleasure having you with us today and sharing your expertise with us. We appreciate it so much. We're going to take a couple of weeks off our autumn hiatus, but we'll be back in a few weeks with another series of talking about preservation at noontime. So stay tuned for some more great programs. And if you have any suggestions on what you'd like to learn more about, feel free to shoot us an email or a phone call. And I'd like to encourage everyone to please become a member or renew your membership with Preservation Connecticut, because we can't bring these programs to you without our strong membership base. So thank you all so much. And thanks again to our speakers. We'll have the slide deck and everything available for everyone. And the video also will be available so you can watch it again. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Yay.